Hello, friends. Happy Wednesday. It's Mr. O'Connor here. How are all of you? Don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little bit bored, which is a normal feeling to have when you're spending this much time at home. So I decided to do something that's one of my favorite things to do when I'm bored, which is to read, and I was hoping that you read with me today. So I came in here to the library in my house, which is one of my favorite places because it has all of my favorite books, as well as all the things I need to have my favorite kind of reading experience, like a comfy chair, and like a basket full of stuffies so I have a friend to read with. But the first thing I need to do is pick the book that we'll be reading together. So in trying to choose, I remembered that one of the things we've been talking about is how March is Women's History Month, which is an opportunity for us to think about how we're centralizing books and stories that have characters that identify as women and girls. So I decided to choose a story about a girl named Ada Twist, and the book is called Ada Twist, Scientist. I'm going to get settled here in my comfy chair and pick a friend to read with me. I think I'm going to choose my friend DJ Meatball today. He's called DJ Meatball because not only is he a stuffy, but he can also play music. So I'm going to sit him right next here to me and get the book. Ada Twist, Scientist. Before we begin the book, I'm going to talk about three different things. I'm going to talk about a question that will help us better understand the characters in the story. I'm going to talk about a word that'll help us better access the story. And I'm going to talk about noticings I have around the front cover. So let's talk about the question first. I was wondering, what are some things that you wonder about? I'll give you an example. For me, one of the things I've always wondered is how do refrigerators stay cold? I know that even in the summertime when my house and my kitchen gets hot, the fridge is still cold, and I don't understand how it does that. How does the fridge stay cold? That's a wondering that I have. Take a moment to think about a wondering that you have, and if you can, pause this video and share your wondering with somebody who's near you. Thinking about what you wonder about will help you better understand the characters in this story. Another thing that will help you better understand this story is the word hypothesis. Let's snap that word out. Ready, set, snap. Hypothesis. Let's count it out. Hypothesis. Let's wave it out like a wizard. Ready, set, hypothesis. Let's always count. Hypothesis. How many parts to that word? 4 parts to that word. And hypothesis means an idea about why things happen. And a good reader will listen for that word in this story. The last thing we're going to do before we begin is do noticings about the front cover. So I like to always notice around identity, because that's something that we've studied in class and something that we know is important. And I've read this story before, so I know some things about these characters that are true. I know that Ada identifies as a girl. And I know that this character is her brother and that he identifies as a boy. That also tells us a little bit about their family identity, that there is one brother and one sister. We're also going to meet her parents in this book a little bit later on. I know that Ada's race identity is black and that her age identity is a kid. She's not a grown-up. I can also tell some things about her interests by looking at the front cover. I noticed that she's wearing safety goggles and that she's writing things that she's researched on a board. That makes me think she's interested in science, and that matches this word scientist that's in the title. So let's begin now. Ada Twist, Scientist, written by Andrea Beatty and illustrated by David Roberts. Ada Marie said not a word until the day she turned 3. She bounced in her crib and she looked all around, observing the world but not making a sound. She learned how to climb and she made her big break with a trail of chaos left in her wake. She ran through the day chasing each sound and sight, and she didn't slow down until she conked out at night. That means until she went to sleep. Her parents were frazzled, but they tried not to freak, as Ada grew bigger and still did not speak. Clearly young Ada, with lots in her head, would have something to say when it ought to be said. Notice the illustrator is showing us that Ada looks very closely at things, and she thinks a lot about things, but the author has told us that she doesn't talk about those things yet, that she doesn't speak very much, not at all, in fact, and now she's 3 years old. The author also told us her parents were frazzled about that. Frazzled is a red word, which just means that they were worried. That's just what happened when Ada turned 3. She tore through the house on a fact-finding spree and climbed up the clock just as high as she could. Her parents yelled, "Stop!" as all good parents would. Ada's chin quivered, but she did not cry. She took a deep breath and she simply asked, "Why?" Notice her first word is a question, a wondering of why. Why does it tick and why does it talk? Why don't we call it a granddaughter clock? Why are there pointy things stuck to a rose? Why are there hairs up inside of your nose? She started with why and then what, how, and when. By bedtime, she came back to why once again. She drifted to sleep as her dazed parents smiled at the curious thoughts of their curious child, who wanted to know what the world was about. They kissed her and whispered, "You'll figure it out." Her parents kept up with their high-flying kid, whose questions and chaos both grew as she did. That's the author telling us that she's still very curious. Even Miss Greer found her hands were quite full when young Ada's chaos wreaked havoc at school, but this much was clear about Miss Ada Twist. She had all the traits of a great scientist. Ada was busy that first day of spring, testing the sounds that make mockingbirds sing, when a horrible stench whacked her right in the nose, a pungent aroma that curled her toes. "Zowie," said Ada, which got her to thinking, what is the source of that terrible stinking? And how does a nose know that there's something to smell? And does it still stink if there's no nose to tell? She rattled off questions and she tapped on her chin. She'd start at the start, where she ought to begin. A mystery, a riddle, a puzzle, a quest. This was the moment that Ada loved best. The author's telling us that there's a question that Ada has about what was making a smell smell, and what is a smell anyways, and it's really important to her to find out the answers when she has questions. Ada did research to learn all she could of smelling and smells, both stinky and good. One hypothesis Ada thought could be true: the terrible stink came from Dad's cabbage stew. She tested and tested, but soon Ada knew it was time to come up with hypothesis 2. That's the author telling us it wasn't Dad's cabbage stew, it must be something else. Then, zowie, the stink stuck again just like that. Hypothesis 2, it's caused by the cat. The cat couldn't make such a stink on its own. It needed perfume and some fancy cologne. So, young Ada tested, but the test was a flop. She started again, but her parents yelled, "Stop!" I wonder why her parents yelled stop. Look at that illustration. I see the illustrator's giving us a clue. Looks like she was about to put the cat in the washing machine. That doesn't seem safe. Ada Marie, to the thinking chair now, by the time we count 3. "Enough," said her mother. "That's it," said her dad. Her parents were frustrated, frazzled, and mad. "Why?" Ada questioned. Her mother said, "No." "But what?" Ada queried. Her father said, "Go. You've ruined our supper. You've made the cat stink. Enough with your questions. Now sit there and think." She looked at her parents. Her heart turned to goo. Poor Ada Twist didn't know what to do. Now that it was important to Ada to answer the question, I can see that she feels bad about having caused a problem. Wonder what she's going to do. She sat all alone by herself in the hall, and Ada once more could say nothing at all. And so Ada sat, and she sat, and she sat, and she thought about science and Stu and the cat, and how her experiments made such a big mess. Does it have to be so? Is that part of success? Are messes a problem? And while she was thinking, what was the source of that terrible stinking? So Ada Marie did what scientists do. She asked a small question, and then she asked 2, and each of those led her to 3 questions more, and some of those questions resulted in 4. And as Ada got thinking, she really dug in. She scribbled her questions and tapped on her chin. She started at why, and then what, how, and when, and at the end of the hall, she reached why once again. I notice the illustrator is showing us that as she's thinking, she's writing her ideas down on the wall. It makes me a little bit worried because I think that's something she's probably not supposed to do. But I also know that finding the answers to questions is really important to Ada. The author and the illustrator have shown us that. I wonder what's going to happen. Her parents calmed down and they came back to talk. They looked at the hallway and they just had to gawk. No patch of bare paint could be seen on the wall. The thinking chair now was the great thinking hall. They watched their young daughter and sighed as they did. What would they do with this curious kid who wanted to know what the world was about? They smiled and they whispered, "We'll figure it out." That's interesting. I thought her parents were going to get frustrated with her, maybe even give her a consequence, because look at all that writing she did on the wall. But I hear the author telling us that they knew she's curious, and they knew that that was a part of who she was, that they just had to do something to figure it out. And that's what they did, because that's what you do when your kid has a passion and a heart that is true. So they remade their world. Now they're all in the act of helping young Ada sort fiction from fact. She asks lots of questions. How could she resist? It's all in the heart of a young scientist. And as for that smell, what can Ada Twist do but learn all she can with her friends in grade 2? Will they discover the stink that curls toes? Well, that's the question. Someday. Who knows? So as always when reading a book, friends, I have a good reader question for you to consider. And my good reader question is this. Why does Ada ask so many questions? Why does Ada ask so many questions? Take a moment to think about that. Think about what you learned about Ada in this story. Remember that a good answer usually has clues from the book, like the author told me when he wrote, or the illustrator showed me when they drew. It's a good way to answer that question. So think now, and then if you can, pause this video and talk to someone near you about why does Ada ask so many questions? I hope you had a good conversation. I'm going to show you my answer now. I think Ada asks so many questions because she's curious. And I know that because the author told us on this page, the author said that they watched their young daughter and sighed as they did. What would they do with this curious kid? When the author described Ada as curious, I knew that the word curious meant that someone had lots of questions and they like to find lots of information. That's why she did it. I also remember that the author said that she was a young scientist. And I know that scientists like to figure things out by asking questions. So I think that's why Ada did it. And that's why she asks so many questions. It's my good reader question today. I'd love for you to share your good reader answer with me. You can have your parents send a picture, your family send a picture or a video to Mr. O'Connor, and I can see your answer if you took one of it. Another good thing we can do whenever we're reading a story is to think about its genre. Now, the story Ada Twist Scientist we know was fiction. We know it was fiction because that story was written to tell us a story. The author wrote it to tell us a story, not to teach us something new and true. And we know that in fiction writing, that's what the author does. We also know that in fiction writing, there are characters, people or animals, who are in a story. And we also know that in fiction writing, there is a setting. A setting we know is where the story happens. So in thinking about this story, there were lots of characters that were drawn, but only a few characters who were the most important. Take a moment to think about who the most important characters were, and if you can, pause this video and share them with someone near you. For me, those characters were Ada, Ada's cat, cat, and her family, I know that E is that final Y sound. So for me, the most important characters were Ada, her cat, and her family. Thinking about the setting, think about what the illustrator drew, the setting changed a couple of times, but most of the time I know they were at Ada's house because the author talked about how her parents made her sit in their great thinking chair, which I think was definitely a part of their house. Now, the last thing we know is true about fiction stories is that there's usually a problem and that somehow that problem gets solved. So your last assignment today with this book is to think about what was the problem in Ada Twist Scientist and how did it get solved? And you can either draw a picture or write a sentence about that, or even better, do both. Draw a picture of the problem, how it got solved, and write a sentence about how the problem in Ada Twist Scientist was solved. When it's done, send it to your teacher. We can't wait to see your work. Thanks so much and hope you're having a good day. Let's read a book again tomorrow. Bye.